trust, of course, anybody in the relationship space would agree, trust is foundational to a marriage, just like it is to a team that's working together or a sports team. For us to trust each other, we actually have to be accountable, responsible people. Mm-hmm. And another part that I'll link to from what you just said, we have to trust that we're going to do things differently.
But if you're going to play the game of marriage and you're going to be a leader in marriage, it takes courage. Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is about leadership in marriage.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want this to be conceptual. Mm-hmm. You know, I did find out that there is more books on leadership than anything else.
That's a lot.
The person I heard that from went on to say that that's a good sign that we don't really know what it is.
It's so true, yes.
So leadership in marriage, I'm going to come from a more male perspective, speaking from the male perspective and what we see in coaching.
I'll represent the women here.
Let you represent the women. And just to start off, leadership. It's influence, not control. Mm-hmm. It's directing, not dominating.
So good. But those are big differences.
They are big differences.
No one wants to be dominated.
Yeah, I think that gets muddied sometimes.
Maybe in the bedroom, but not outside the bedroom.
Yeah, when it's kind of chosen to be that way, right? Mm-hmm. Permission is granted.
Yes.
It's a whole different topic I think we just got on. So leadership, a lot different from a business perspective, even from your own individual living life, maybe with work, friends, family. Well, not so much family, because we do want to have the family and marriage leadership. So within your defined role of a partner, and then how that leadership shows up. Yeah. Because your dissatisfaction in the marriage can come from a lack of leadership and a combination having a power struggle. Now, those are pretty close as I thought about them. A lack of leadership usually causes another person to feel that they have to either step into a role or step into a way of being, step into a partner and the roles and responsibilities that they don't feel like are their gifts or that they've chosen.
Like they're carrying the weight of it all.
Carrying the weight. Mm-hmm. And we hear this a number of times where... So let me go to the men's perspective, right? So there's also sort of a societal thing here where there's like almost a push against not being in a patriarchal dominated society. And so there's also, I feel, and rightfully so, a women's personal empowerment movement. Now, these can be negotiated in a marriage and can work out very well, but they can also create these power dynamics sort of unintentionally. So it seems like men should try to not be so dominant. And so when that's really correlated to leadership, then what I found is that in marriage, a lot of men are starting to be very passive, very shut down. They lose their voice. They aren't connected to their authentic power for themselves and just being decisive and making decisions, which we're going to go into some of the areas to focus on how to be a leader in these cases. And then because of that, it makes women feel like they step in more into a masculine role. Many women are, can I say this on a clean podcast, badass?
Yes. And
they show up in that masculine, directive, decisiveness, energy with their business or with work or with their family. And then when their partner comes back home and they're in the home environment, when men are passive, then the female counterparts feel as if they have to keep on leading, making decisions, almost pulling their partner. So that's where you get a lot of dissatisfaction. And then sort of on the opposite side, a power struggle. If both people are sort of jockeying for decision-making, well, now you get, who's supposed to surrender? And is this a male-female thing? It's like, oh, you're belittling me because I'm this, you're making me feel like this gender that's subordinate. Obviously, that's a difficult place to be too.
And in our marriage, we don't treat leadership as if you are the leader and you are above me. That's not how we see or handle leadership. We actually see ourselves both as leaders. And we'll talk about traits of leadership in general and how those are exuded by each of us. But we are co-leaders. And you're going to hear us talk about trusting each other and our differences and our different roles. But I think that's important to note. We aren't even saying that one of you is in charge of the other or that one person has to always submit to the other person. We lead together. We both intend to show up as leaders in the marriage. So I'm excited to get into this.
I want to do a quick biological difference. And so biologically, right, males are stronger in like muscle and bone structure, right? And sort of built that way to take on burdens and be more durable. And was always that way in like other earlier cultures, right, where we were like fighting off different animals and finding food and hunting and doing all that
Defending
stuff.
land.
Yeah, defending land. So it was a lot of physicality in the defense, in being durable, in being reliable, and being responsible. Nowadays, we don't necessarily have that, but I think one of the keys there is the ideal of being reliable, of being resilient,
Strong.
of being responsible and strong, I do think seems to start to diminish. And I think that's a place that men can really step back up into that.
I think, can I just say one quick thing before you go further into your biological point? Think about how many men are sitting in desks. And of course, this might be a stretch, but I see a correlation from that passivity that you mentioned and how men especially, aren't being as physical. They aren't doing things that challenge themselves physically, that activate their nervous system, and they're maybe hormonally out of balance. Their testosterone levels, a lot of men actually have low testosterone levels. And so anyway, I just think that there's a correlation between how much people are like men, especially, and women too, but sitting at desks, not getting that physical activation that is important.
Oh, yeah. From the financial and business lens, right, you have the sort of quadrant where you have blue collar, right, versus like white collar, investor, business owner. And even though blue collar would typically make the least, it is the most fulfilling. To what you're saying, people are out there using their hands, well, in this case, like more so men, building things, breaking things down, rebuilding them. And there's a number of jobs that are just for men, like being in a mine. Like that's just not for women, right? And there's, because of a certain biological difference in that resilience, taking on a burden, different things like that, or being out in the cold, a winter time up in Alaska, hunting, or even like putting up power lines. Like that's a really difficult job. Skyscrapers, like construction, like there are a lot of these. How about being in a sewer? How about like building and kicking around in like muck and stuff? It's like that's just, no one else should do that. Like women don't need to be doing that. So a biological difference there. And then I think there's enough science to say that women are more nurturing and are built to care more about relationships.
We're more attuned to children, right? Like
maybe that's one of the main reasons, is because women, the biggest difference is they birth children. They continue the race.
Yes.
Continue humanity, right?
And we can feel what our kids are going through, right? When I hear Sky cry, my body, in my nervous system feels it, and I'm attuned to what she needs. It's almost like I can hear her from a mile away. Yeah. So that attunement is a factor as well.
So I think we're about integration. So we're about integration leadership, where we both take on leadership roles. And I think we're also about integrating the own masculine, feminine differences within the individual, from resilience and responsibility to nurturing and caring, right? That should be something we seek to have within ourselves.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to lay those out for this leadership discussion and move towards, well, what are some elements of leadership that either one of us could take on?
Yes.
The first one being to have a clear vision. And it allows for a number of things to happen. And I think a part of leadership is to remind the marriage, remind the coupleship on what it is we're going for. And this could also be included, we could say, like a just cause. Like, what are we doing here together?
Yep.
And having a vision, having a just cause, it, number one, allows us to go beyond just our individual selves, to do something more worthwhile than what I might do on my own. And so I think a marriage allows for a higher ideal for us two individuals to pursue. But from a leadership lens, we're going to forget that sometimes. And one of us needs to initiate and remind us of, why are we why are we building a business? Why are we getting our master's while we have a 2-year-old and doing a business together? And like all the things that we're doing, it can get very routine, mundane, and challenging.
Groundhog Day almost.
Groundhog
sometimes.
Day, yeah. So a leader reminds the team, which I know is the next point, reminds the team of two why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And then it also calls you, the individual, to set aside your individual preferences for the greater cause.
Well, and again, we do this for each other. This isn't all on you to be reminding us of the vision. We both are committed to being leaders in this, and we both express it in different ways. Like the way you remind us of our vision is different than the way I do it. But we both are going to step up at different times and say, hey, here's where we are. I know it feels hard, or I know it's been feeling like Groundhog Day, but here's what we're working towards.
Last point on that, I'll say, and sometimes remembering, I have to sacrifice my short-term sort of preferences on how things are going to get done. It's like, do I need to tell you about how I'd like the spoons to be put in the dishwasher, or
this darn coffee cup that I don't
or
do
the
right.
coffee cup, or how things get picked up? And I think you reminded me of that even just coming here to film this today, right? It's like, or similar to the post, right? Are these micro criticisms I'm making based on my preferences, and is that really taking away from your love account? And if I zone in on so micro of localized actions, that it just bogs us down.
Yeah.
Rather than reminding, we came into town, right? We came to shoot in this studio, and things didn't go exactly as planned, but
Here's
am I
the
someone that
vision.
can remind us of why we're doing this?
Absolutely. So the second characteristic and aspect of leadership in the marriage is trusting the team and being a trustworthy team member. And I wanted to shout you out because yesterday we were on a session, an introductory session with couples. They were just getting to know us. And you were so straight up and bold. I loved it because we hear this theme a lot of times. One partner will say, I need more grace. I need to feel more trusted in the partnership as we take them through one of the exercises. And we hear that a lot. And you said, it's one thing to ask to be trusted, to have more grace from your partner when you are delivering, like say 95% of the time, right? When you are showing up, when you are following through the majority of the time. It's a tough ask to say, I need you to trust me. I need you to have more grace for me when you are doing maybe 40% of what you say or what you're responsible for or is in your role. And I think that was so powerful, and it even hit me too, right? That we have to be honest with ourselves. Am I showing up as the best team member that I can be? Trust, of course, anybody in the relationship space would agree, trust is foundational to a marriage, just like it is to a team that's working together or a sports team. For us to trust each other, we actually have to be accountable, responsible people. And another part that I'll link to from what you just said, we have to trust that we're going to do things differently. And sometimes I do have to remind you of that lovingly of, hey, I know that I do it a little bit different than you do. And I might miss some of the things that are important to you and some of the quirks and the differences. But again, that vision, we're both working towards that. And I deliver. Like, I get the big things, right? Don't I?
Yeah, you do.
I get the big things. I focus on the really pivotal needle moving things. I might not get it right with these ones down here that I know sometimes are important to you, but that's another aspect. We have to trust that how we each do things is different and be able to have that discernment of, do I need to say this? Or can I just trust the way they did it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, that discernment is so important inside of that trust that you're creating.
I think last point on the team is to initiate your own responsibilities and repair.
Say more about that, because initiation is something a lot of us women, when it does feel like our partner, our male partner, is showing up more passive, as you said, they aren't actually in their power. They aren't activated in their leadership and their masculinity. It does feel like I have to kind of, not in our situation, right? But for a lot of couples, it will feel to her like, I have to ask you to initiate. I have to remind you. And that's not initiating. Mm-hmm. So that is a big frustration. Do you want to speak a little more to that?
I think you captured it generally, so I want to talk about it from maybe our perspective. Because we have such defined roles and responsibilities that, and then we both just initiate on those responsibilities, that it's clear. So more of a power struggle or breakdown for a couple similar to us, and certainly for us, is on smaller things that are not as defined. Mm-hmm. And that you have a personality of being a red or an action, person. Mm-hmm. Maybe, someone that just takes... I don't know if you would say it's not commanding, but you sort of take charge, you get things done. So when it comes to things that are shared and there's not specific agreement about it, then I think you'll just pick up and do it. Mm-hmm. And then so from then my perspective, it's like on those small things, I start to just sit back. So is that a big deal? I mean, not necessarily, but whenever I sit back, my energy and my engagement is also slightly removed. Mm-hmm. So then over time, it can feel like you just keep having to drive the boat on that one thing. I think an example might be, funny enough, is the podcast topics that we come up with each week. It was that I was writing them, and then you wanted to write some, so then you did, and then we never really had a clear conversation.
Had a little
so
power
then you
struggle.
just kept on doing it, but then it's like, oh, I see that you're finishing the podcast, so I do other things. Mm. But then you might get frustrated later that, hey, why do I always have to do everything for the podcast? Mm-hmm. So I know it's a very specific example. So basically for a team, what are your responsibilities? Own them, and then initiate them. Your partner should not have to remind you to follow through. And then I know we're stepping over this quickly, but initiating repair.
Yes.
Just have to be someone, as a leader, you initiate repair, whether it was your fault or not, or you started it. Again, if you're familiar with the 5 R's, you got to just look for where you have responsibility and just initiate the repair conversation, even if there's things for your partner to repair on your side as well.
And to link to another session yesterday where we were talking about this, one of the partners asked, how do we hold each other accountable in a way that won't start conflict?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's hard.
And here's the thing that we said. We said that's not even the first place to start, is holding the other person accountable. You two need to get clear on your standard for yourself, because they weren't holding themselves to a high standard. It was like this. It was like, well, you're lowering your standard, so I'll lower mine. Mm-hmm. And then, well, now I'm going to lower mine. And they just were getting worse and worse and worse.
Which shows up a lot in conflict specifically, where you're not a willingness. What is it? You're having no standard. Mm-hmm. You'll make threats to the relationship in conflict.
Or have excuses for why you act a certain way and handle your emotion. So rather than even focusing on holding each other accountable, get clear on your standard for yourself and hold it there. And be able to be the kind of partner you want to be. Hold yourself to your own standard. Be that teammate that you'd be proud of, as opposed to just giving yourself excuses because of how they are acting or lowering their standards.
That's perfect. So let's move to the third little key or aspect here around leadership in marriage specifically. And this is an interesting one. It's to have a competitive rival within your partner.
Ooh, say more about that.
So this is an interesting topic, because this can only happen if everything else is really working out well. Mm-hmm. If you have a high love account, if you are a good teammate, meaning you're initiating your own responsibilities and repair, and you're really doing a lot of the core principles for a healthy, thriving marriage, reminding each other of the vision, for example. So in all that, then what you need is a rival, not someone to compete against or have a win-lose dynamic, but it's a collaborative rival where you challenge the other person.
So we're challenging each other?
When you think about that, you really don't want to be in a relationship very long with someone that doesn't challenge you. Some people experience this as sometimes in the intellectual side. Some people use the phrase like equally yoked in a sense too, right? Not on the same topic, but you're generally expanding and growing at the similar pace. Like you've developed to a certain place together. Because if you feel like, I know it's an interesting dynamic, if you feel like you're just way more advanced than your partner and they're not growing and they don't really push themselves, then naturally that partner's going to push your partner to be better. If you can't be willing to accept that kind of challenge, it's not going to be a good match.
It'll be boring.
Well, it's going to be boring for the person that feels like they are advancing.
Yes.
And it's going to feel very controlling and dominating and critical for the other person. That's like, you don't accept me for who I am. So it's this balance, right? Because you might feel like that in certain seasons, like when a love account is low, for example. So that's why I said this collaborative rival dynamic. You need someone that's going to challenge you, that's going to show you the places that you do need to develop, where you're lacking something in character trait that you need to build, and at the same time be willing to accept that kind of feedback and mirror from your partner and do that for each other.
That is something we can do. We can give each other loving, most of the time, feedback.
Yeah.
Right?
Most of the time.
We don't say it as overt criticisms in the heat of the moment. But you're right. We do challenge each other, whether it's by sharing something we're learning about, that we're listening to, we're reading, that we're considering in our lives. Like we talk about it. And even, parenting is a hot topic for a lot of couples. It can be a source of conflict if it feels like they aren't on the same page with how to handle discipline or big feelings, things like that. When you and I are encountering new situations with our daughter, we debrief together and we say, okay, how could we handle that situation better, differently? We don't villainize each other. We don't make each other the problem, but we challenge each other. We debrief afterwards. Hey, I know that was frustrating. How could we handle it better? And it's at the right moment. So we do want to challenge each other. We also have to be thoughtful about the timing. We don't want to challenge each other mid big feelings moment with our child, right? We want to be discerning about when to have those conversations for betterment.
So before you move to the next point, though it can be frustrating at times to feel like you have this competitive rival because they challenge you to grow, just think about, I would rather be challenged by you. And then just knowing that sometimes I get frustrated by that. But I would rather be challenged than feel as if I'm constantly having to drag you forward from doing nothing. Like if you had no aspirations.
Or if I was just kind of backtracking.
It'd be so unfulfilling.
Yes, that's so true. So the next aspect of leadership in marriage is a substantial amount of flexibility. So you may have heard us talk on different episodes about the importance of flexibility, right? That we have to be able to adjust our responsibilities, our perspective, our choices, especially because your life is going to evolve together. You and I, and our circumstances today, are so different than 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So we have to be flexible. That is one trait that I feel is pretty much a non-negotiable. Now, there's varying amounts of flexibility. You don't want to be overly flexible to where you actually sacrifice what is important to you, your core values. But also, we don't want to be too rigid. So there is a healthy amount of flexibility within the partnership where I think you and I, we just look at kind of the holistic picture of our life, whether that is with our child, with our business, with projects we're undertaking, building our home, issues with family. We look at it holistically and we go, all right, what's the team need right now? How can I need to maybe adjust? Because, maybe what you're going through, I actually need to step up in this area. So I need to be able to be flexible as opposed to rigid. Here's how I am. Here's my routine. Here's how I like to do it. That would be challenging. And that's sometimes a source of conflict, is being too rigid, not being able to be flexible to what does the team need right now.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, linking to number one, which was about the just cause, I think there needs to be substantial flexibility in that the leader can hold the vision, but you need to be flexible enough on the path that gets you there. And that you don't even know what the path is. You know what you're shooting for. And to have it be where you make also going to crucible moments from, the previous podcast is being able to make those kind of decisions on, say, lifestyle or where you live. Or for me, it was even the decision to have a child when I didn't think that was initially going to be my path. Knowing what the vision is or the just cause, and being so flexible on where I thought my more immediate life was going to go, it's going to be scary. And it really leads to the last point, number 5, is then you have to have the courage to live what this business guy, Simon Sinek, maybe a lot of people know him. He does a lot on leadership, so I listened to some before this. You have to have the courage to live an infinite life. And that kind of ties it all together where, from his perspective with businesses, he can see those that just try to win in the short term versus those businesses that they're not competing with anyone. They're playing an infinite game. His example was Microsoft and Apple. So he went to a big Microsoft conference, and all of Microsoft's just presentations were about, we're going to beat Apple.
Anti-Apple.
Pretty much. So they were competing. Okay, that's fine. But he went to Apple. All of Apple's presentations had nothing to do with any other company. It was focused on what they were creating, the technology, the vision, how it was going to serve people, integrating people's lives, making it easier, being innovators. And he's like, there was a big, big difference, right? And I mean, you can kind of look at those paths.
Yes.
And though in the short term, maybe, Microsoft's focus served them. But if you're going to play the game of marriage and you're going to be a leader in marriage, it takes courage, because you got to make some decisions that seem like it might hinder you in the short term, and it very well might. But you make the decisions for, as he called it, the infinite game, the long-term game, the just cause, the vision.
Yeah.
So, I think maybe where we failed, and we'll bring this up only one more time, but in that crucible moment we had last year, we made a decision around investing probably for too short-term a focus. And we weren't thinking about the long term. Now, towards the end of that, we decided, watch this now, as leaders together, we made the decision to sell the property at a loss for the long term, freeing up our own focus, our energy. We're going to recoup some capital so that we could move into the areas that were our gifts and get out of something that was not an industry that we really needed to be in.
And it's been so fruitful, and it's changed the trajectory of our financial lives forever and for the positive. You're so right in that. I love this topic around leadership. And again, I just want to reiterate with each of these points that we really see ourselves as leaders in this marriage. And I think that's one thing that isn't discussed enough. Of course, having things like communication skills and conflict skills and being on the same page financially. But what isn't talked about enough in the context of marriage is character, is being a leader together. And I don't have to keep reminding you to please, pull your weight, be a leader. You are a leader, because that's the standard you hold yourself to. Thank God, right? Thank you for being someone who holds yourself to a standard of being a leader, and you intentionally every day listen to content, read books, because you want to be the best father that you can be, the best husband, the best man, friend, and so on. And do you feel I do the same? Do you feel I show up as a leader?
Gosh, absolutely, yeah. And sometimes, I push against that, because then I fall into feeling like it's control or, I don't have a say. But that's a smaller part of the time. Again, I would rather be in those small frustrations than the opposite, right?
Yeah. No, so I really think that the key for all of this is how we hold ourselves to a standard of being a leader and co-leading together.
And remembering that leadership is influence and not control.
Yes.
So as you know, you can read business books or podcasts and that leaders aren't always at the front. So sometimes leading, if it is truly influence, is that you take a back seat and you allow your partner to step into challenge sometimes because maybe there is a place they need to grow or they need to step into more self-confidence or something like that.
Yeah.
I can still hold like the vision, but sometimes my leadership might actually be a conscious choice to let you decide. So I'm not trying to control you, I'm just trying to influence the long term, the infinite game, the just cause, the worthy ideal that our life and our marriage is.
So with that, if you continue to want to be a great partner, parent, person, then make sure you dive into our resources. We're heading into the end of the year. You want to end this year strong. You don't want to just say, oh, we'll kind of survive the holidays, we'll get through it, then we'll focus on our relationship at the new year. This is a really crucible moment for a lot of couples. So make sure you dive into our resources. You can get on our wait list for private sessions with us. You can dive into our instant access guides right away for conflict repair, de-escalation, the family meeting workbook. We have an abundance of resources, including some in-person experiences with us. So you want to go to meetthefreemans.com/links, and that'll also be linked in the show notes, and really dive into our resources because it's one thing to listen to content, to get moments of motivation and perspective. It's another to take action for your partnership. And so that's why it really is important to go and explore our resources. Again, meetthefreemans.com/links. And if you are new here and you are enjoying this podcast, please give us a rating, hopefully a positive one, right? We always love the 5-star ratings if you feel that. But if you can rate us on whichever platform you're listening on and subscribe to the show, because we are grateful to be able to reach so many of you. But with that, we love you and we'll talk to you on the next episode.